Thank you for being so much, esteemed members of the Rotary Club, RC Bombay West. Thank you so much for inviting me today to speak about my love, that would be tattoo art and making the world a better place, something we all have in common. I'm gonna do some slide for you. Here we go. And let's see, we'll start. Can everybody see? Yep, a little bit. So just to lighten things up, I don't imagine many members here are tattooed, but, and in fact, I didn't like tattoos when I first started, but can everybody see the slide?
Yeah.
Here we have, yeah, okay. So we have Lyle Tuttle, who was one of our great historians in tattoo culture, and he traveled the world speaking to groups such as, just like you today. And we just have like what the answers are when people say, what do tattoos look like when you get old, right? What are we gonna look like when we're old anyway? And here we have, he was on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine in 1970 as a 40-year-old, and he just passed in 83. Here's another one that we think about in my culture, call one's mother. This word is a lesser crime than to call our sacred instrument of tattooing a gun. So even in this kind of marginalized culture, we still have our standards. And let's see, there we go. So ancient is time, as modern as tomorrow. This is something that we all say. We have said this for a century on our business cards. As ancient as time and as modern as tomorrow. And basically this is because tattooing has existed for millennia. And if you would indulge me, I would argue that tattooing is humankind's first art form. Before the dolmens were erected, before skins were beaten into leather for clothing, before reeds were woven into vessels, humans had to eat and they had to stay warm. So imagine, if you will, the charred point of an animal bone as its meat lies roasting on the fire. It is both tantalizing and dangerous. Greedy hands and starving mouths could easily be scratched or even pierced by such an object. Its charcoal shard leaving an indelible mark on the consumer's skin. Such a mark would never leave the body, a magical reminder of satiety in a world of want. So the oldest figurative art we have in the world is the 4,000-year-old sheep. I'll go back. Dang it. This 4,000-year-old Lowenmensch figurine named for its lion's head, and it has marks on the side of its arm as tattoo marks. So this is the oldest figurative art we have. The oldest human we have is this guy, Wetzi, who was an Iceman. Perhaps you're familiar with him. He was found in the Wetz Valley in Austria, Italy, Alps. And he was about 5,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, 4th millennium BC. He was about 60 centimeters high and was killed by blood loss from an arrowhead lodged in his left scapula. And he died when he was about 45 years old. And his arm is reaching over, he was found like this because he was trying to dig this arrowhead out of his back, and he had removed the shaft. So he had actually 4 different individuals' blood on him. He had his own blood, and he had blood from 2 different individuals on the same arrowhead. So he had shot somebody, shot 2 people, and he was actually carrying somebody as like maybe a rescue mission too. So this poor guy went down, and he is covered with tattoos. He's got 61 carbon ink tattoos, 19 groups of simple lines and dots on his lower spine, left wrist, behind his right knee, and both his ankles. He also had a pouch here that was filled with thin bone needles, as well as his hunting accoutrements. So poor Wetzi suffered from debilitating arthritis, among other maladies. A radiological examination of Wetzi's bones showed age-conditioned or strain-induced degeneration corresponding to many of these tattooed areas, including osteochondrosis and slight spondylosis in the lumbar spine, wear and tear degeneration on the knee, and especially in the ankle joints. So we think that because of these bone needles, these marks of tattoos were corresponding to acupuncture points that we still use today. So this would have been predated. This is about 2,000 years before we were aware that acupuncture even existed from China, from artifacts in China. So this guy was out in the bush, hunting mammoth, shepherding, and when it got cold at night, he would take these needles and the tattoos would show exactly where to treat himself with acupuncture. So the majority of other tattoos are on meridians and other acupunctural parts of his body. We think that Wetzi had whipworm, which would cause intestinal pain. And a lot of these heavy tattoo areas were where we would treat somebody with abdomen pain with acupuncture as well. So it would have brought him such relief, some relief, which supports the theory that they're used for therapeutic purposes. One last note on a Wetzi before we move forward in time, a few thousand years, to tribal tattooing. The flora found in a Wetzi's gut is most similar to 3 modern individuals from northern India. So the strain itself, of course, is older than modern northern Indian strain, but we've got a relationship here between a Wetzi and northern India, very, very old. Okay, so moving on to tribal tattoos. Here we have a quote that we again use in tattoo culture on our business cards for at least a century: "More precious than gold can never be lost or stolen." And this is a theme we've been seeing for thousands of years with tribal people. So in my research, I'm seeing very many parallels between Indian tribal tattooing and tribal tattooing throughout the world, particularly images of these for protection, both carnal and spiritual, as well as a perception of value that can never be stolen from them, all of which can be interpreted as anchors for mental health. For example, several tribes of the Gujarat and the agrarian Mer believe that tattoos, not prosperity or wealth, are the only substantive things that accompany them into the afterlife. A Mer proverb would state, "We may be deprived of all things in the world, but nobody has the power to remove tattoo marks." Well, you know, in the ancient age. We have a Mer tattoo song that brings about this idea more clearly. "Rama, oh Rama, my tattoos are the color of Hingalo. Oh Rama, listen, oh Rama, uncles, brothers, and grandfather, oh Rama. Mother and aunt and all return from the gateway, oh Rama. These tattoos are my companions to the funeral pyre, oh Rama. Rama, oh Rama, my tattoos are the color of Hingalo, oh Rama." So maybe even the color of blood, we would say blood in, blood out. So this latter idea of material possession among tribal collectors is reflected throughout the modern world, with an incredible uptick in time and of tattoos during times of disaster. So I was tattooing in New Orleans, Louisiana, immediately after Hurricane Katrina, and we were besieged by clients. People who had lost everything in the flood, white collar, professional people who would never consider being tattooed, suddenly were getting back pieces, spending thousands on tattoos. And in dialoguing with these individuals, it was clear to me that we're performing some sort of material level therapy. They'd suffered so much financially, so much loss, and so much loss emotionally, that the discomfort of the tattoo pain was minimal compared to the comfort that they received from knowing that they had some feeling of autonomy over themselves and a possession that could not be taken from them. As pandemic restrictions are being lifted, the media of the world is also reporting on a huge demand for tattoos. The feeling of autonomy after being denied the luxury of personal freedom for so many months, as well as the collective facing fears of suffering and death, have inspired an unprecedented march to tattoo shops throughout the developed world. This top headline here is what came out yesterday, Delhi. So even in places like Dubai and Abu Dhabi, where it's still illegal to perform tattoos, we're seeing huge numbers of people becoming tattooed. This is unsurprising, actually, to my older peers who always saw an increase in demand during times of war. So indeed, sales in tattoo have always increased during uncertain times in three we'd call bulletproof industries. Those would be alcohol, tattoos, and prostitution. Okay, so speaking of sexual autonomy is another uppermost reason for tattooing among tribal women. Women among all parts of the wide-ranging tribes of India often bear visible tattoos that would be the parts of their bodies that are exposed, not covered by clothes. So these tattoos were designed to make them unattractive to men of other villages, other tribes, and as well as the upper castes. While within these tribal codes, these marks are seen as beautifying, ironically, they're also meant to uglify and to stave off abduction. Abduction is also a reason why we see tattoos among the tribes of the Western Balkans, from dating back to the 16th century. Because of its proximity to the shoreline, the regions now known as Croatia, Bosnia, and Montenegro were targets for kidnapping by Turkish warriors of the Ottoman Empire. So children were snatched from their villages, the sons were conscripted into the Turkish army, taken all over the world. They were never seen or heard from again, and the daughters were stolen away as sex slaves and domestic servants. It wasn't until tribal elders realized that tattooing the visible parts of the children's bodies, they would be considered unclean by the Muslim Turks and thereby avoided capture and kidnapping. So children as young as 2 were marked on their hands, throats, chests, and faces with Coptic-like symbols that predate Slavic symbolism. So gender-affirming tattoos, another topic. Here's some more examples. There's the Baba tattooing a young gal, but again, highly visible. And we still have women in the mountains around here, older women with tribal tattoos. So a hot topic right now in modern world, we have a gender affirmation. So in tattooing, gender affirming marks go back thousands of years. So we have this is another variation on tribal tattooing. In some cases, women are tattooed as a sort of mental preparation to ensure that they can withstand the pain of childbirth. In the Mar culture, an untattooed woman would be rejected by her in-laws, and she would be presented like a man, untattooed. And in the Santhal tribe, women are tattooed painfully at adolescence with sharp thorns and pigment made of lamp soot and tannin, often mixed with turmeric to prevent swelling. Some tribes use urine as a suspension for the pigment, as it is considered sterile, a parallel we see in prison tattooing throughout history, where tattoo tools are not readily available. In addition to the women, we also have manhood ceremonies. In particular, the collection of the heads of enemies were the primary reason the Konyak tribe withstood hours of painful facial tattooing. While boys were first tattooed in adolescence, they had to collect at least one head from a neighboring village, ensuring fertility in agriculture for the tribe, as well as fertility in the young men themselves. The facial tattoo was performed by the tribal queen and took the entire day to execute. Now it's interesting, as we're seeing a movement away from tribal tattooing in the modern era, and an increase in millennial tattooing. So as the tribes are moving away from their traditional tattoos, millennials are embracing more modern tattoos. And also, there was a slide down of where women would be performing most of these tribal tattoos when it was done by hand. And with the uptick in mechanization, we saw men tattooing men with machines. Another interesting evolution. So the significance of Naga tribal tattooing for men was powerful. The Naga have a great history of tattoos, and during manhood ceremonies, all boys who participated in war got a small piercing. However, the ones who returned to the tribe with an enemy head received a full chest tattoo. And these are very distinctive. We see these all throughout the tribes in this V shape. Some would say we call this a fountain or some feathers. But no matter what, men with these deep V-shaped markings are referred to as tiger chests, because they became tiger-like in killing their enemy. So, of course, spirituality in tribal tattooing is found to be significant as well. The women of Kuchikond tribe of Orissa mark their faces in geometric patterns in order to be recognized by ancestors when they go up into the afterlife. The Dangs shared a similar belief stating, the marks will go with us to paradise, but if one is not tattooed after death, God will use a red-hot plowshare to make them. So there was, the community really wanted you to be tattooed. And it's interesting that they use these geometric marks, because as we know with ayahuasca tribes and then psychedelics, that we're seeing like consistently geometric patterns all around, you know, when we're talking about the experience of the afterlife or beyond the nature of reality. So you might be familiar with these maze-like kolam designs of southern India, which often adorn the thresholds of homes to encourage fertility and protection. We see kolam as a maze to confuse demons. So they're also connected to other aspects of afterlife. In the lower caste and tribes, it's considered a necessity for women and sometimes men to be tattooed by this image in order to avoid punishment in the land of the dead, where Yama's demons would devour the unmarked. Kolam tattoos also worked as a kind of a map because they were believed to help guide the dead person on their way to the land of the dead, so they'd be safely reunited with their deceased ancestors. A lot of those vortex imagery, a lot of these ancient swastika symbols that we see in Masada and Israel and the North American tribes, you know, a lot of these vortexy symbols passing into the afterlife. So we also see throughout the world tattoos as protest and spiritual affirmation. The Ramnamis deserve special mention in this regard. As a caste tribe, they're long victims of the practice of untouchability. Among the many things denied them was entry into temples and practice, and they were not able to practice any Hindu rituals. But about a century ago, a small population fought back and claimed their right over their god, especially Rama, by painting the name Rama on their walls, they're printing their cloth with it, chanting his name, and most importantly, tattooing their bodies and faces with the Rama. It was a loud proclamation of both their protest and their faith, and successful in that. So we also see tattoo as spiritual protest in the Middle East, once again delineating the tribes of Isaac from the tribes of Ishmael. The Coptic Christians of Egypt, for example, must bear a tattoo of the cross in order to be allowed into their churches to pray. It's acting as a sort of ID. So you're like, where's your cross, before they'll even allow you into the churches. So all sorts of reasons for that. This is suggested to have originated in the 7th century when the Christians of the region refused to convert to Islam and were forcibly tattooed by their Arab conquerors. So here we see these Coptic Christians of Egypt, these young people, again, very visible on the forehead, probably to avoid abduction, you know, just uglification, and also beauty in her own tribe. These kids get tattooed very early, even into these times. Here you see young children crying over this maybe 20-second procedure. It doesn't take very long, but it is a mark of power, as you can see this young one who survived it. But actually we have the world's oldest, longest running tattoo shop, the Razzouk family in Jerusalem, which is, you know, Jerusalem is Jewish and they don't get tattooed. We have these Coptic Christians, 700 years old this tattoo shop is. So very interestingly, here we have the stencil procedure, which was some kind of clay, and it would press the design onto the flesh. Again, we're seeing the same images from the Balkan region of the 16th century. Very interesting how these images traveled. Here we have an older pilgrim here. She's probably not tattooed and got her mark at Razzouk. All right, now that we've covered thousands of years of physical and emotional therapeutic tattooing, we will investigate the amazing advancements medical and cosmetic tattooing has offered humanity. Okay, here we go. So this is quite interesting. This is maybe the baseline procedure for therapeutic tattooing with needles. It's called microneedling. And we don't use pigment with microneedling. We use the action of the tattoo machine and distilled water to loosen scar tissue and create collagen. It'll actually create collagen. So if you can imagine, you know, how thick and ropey scars are, a lot of you are medical professionals, you know, we perforate the tissue and collagen can proliferate. And we see a radical differences in, with this procedure. Next we have actually using pigment to do skin matching. So this is where the technician used actual skin tones to minimize the scar. So you have a combined experience of the needles loosening up the scar tissue, flattening out the scar, and then the pigment matching it, so the person, the individual, doesn't have this, you know, reflexive experience in the mirror every time they look at themselves. Here we see some brain surgery. We're also seeing this with we're using this with hair transplant surgery. A lot of these guys have scars around it. So we can also, we might use micropigmentation to fill in these areas with ink, small dots that look like a shaved head. Here you can see that here, that's all shaved, that's all small dots, making it look like he's got a beard. Now this is one of two heroes in my, I just adore these people. They're doing so much good work for the humanity. This one is Basma Hamid, and she is a Canadian-born of Iraqi descent. And she was playing with her brothers in the kitchen when she was 3, and boiling hot oil got on her 50% of her face and her head, over 3rd-degree burns, and she was severely burned as a child. And she went through over 100 plastic surgeries, to the point where the doctor just said, go take your money and go on vacation because we can't do anything more for you. This is just how you're gonna have to live your life. And she said, well, doctor, what do you think about getting eyebrow tattoos? And the doctor said, no way. The doctors were saying that the scar tissue won't take pigments, you know, you're screwed. And she went ahead anyway and got these eyebrows done. And she was astounded with the results, thrilled with the results. And she went at 17 and got her own equipment and started tattooing herself and experimented on her own skin. And she was her own first client. And now she has the wonderfully flourishing operations in both Toronto and in Beverly Hills. And she's tattooed the Universe and one of the Beverly Hills Housewives. And just, I would love to meet this woman one day. She's just a remarkable person. And this article is from the Delhi Times. Here we see vitiligo is often used for tattoo pigment. You see some remarkable transformations here, you know, where the technicians went in and really did wonderful pigment matching. This is very difficult, as you can imagine, you know, especially the skin shifts with our temperatures and sun exposure and age, where the pigment stays static. So being able to help these people face the mirror, you know, after growing up with the experiences is a real privilege. Here we have some remarkable examples of 3D dimensional tattoo therapy. So this individual lost the 2 tips of their fingers, and the artist went in and created fingernails on this individual. So that's completely tattooed. Those aren't real. And so this is where we're seeing actual 3D. Trompe l'oeil would be the expression that the French would use for creating a mural on a wall that looks real. So we're doing this more and more increasingly in tattooing. Here's some of my work where we're doing 3D nipples on mastectomy patients. So you can see in this example, these breasts are completely smooth and round, but when you're coming on them, you have an experience of dimension. And again, that's that trompe l'oeil, you know, fooling the eye, as my art teacher would say. Here, these nipples are repigmented. The surgeons went and created nipples. Now, sometimes these women go through major trauma. They don't have, you know, they have different skill levels of surgeons, and they come to us here to try to get some feeling of balance and normalcy. And here you can see the nipple that the surgeon reconstructed kind of rose up, and I was able to kind of fool the eye again, creating a shadow here so that she has a feeling of, you know, balance. This is fresh So it's a little bit more, way more pinky than we would do. We often overcompensate, as I'm sure you all are aware of. Here, these are fresh, and here, these are healed. So you see the scarring is really minimalized. The focus is not on the scar tissue, but on the nipples themselves. You know, these women, it's rewarding, so rewarding to work with them. All right, now we get to one of my favorite parts is illustrative mastectomy tattooing. This is the executive director. This is a woman, she's a wonderful person, a six-figure earning project manager in the white collar world. And this is what she looks like when she takes her top off, which now she does quite often. So she is the executive director of our charity, Personal Inc., pinc.org, and we match tattoo artists, compassionate, highly trained tattoo artists with women who want to cover their scars with art rather than going nipple reconstruction. So there's her breakfast. She's in her 60s, young lovers, you know how we do. This woman is one of my patients, and she's in her 70s, and you see really disparate, you know, balance in her breasts. And she was so thrilled with these little peonies we put on there that she will flash. She's a nice Jewish lady from Long Island, and she will like flash them at her little garden parties with luncheons with her girlfriends, and it just, you know, adds so much dimension to them. I love hearing these stories. Here we have some wonderful examples of Indian influenced art, some Mendi style, and as well as the lotus. And of course, with your great history of art and imagery, your themes are rampant all over the world. In fact, most people know about Hinduism through getting their tattoo art. So this one is a yoga instructor, and she in particular, her husband was against tattooing. She's a Jewish gal, she's a yoga teacher. I actually had to tell him to leave the studio because he stressed her out so much before this procedure. She wouldn't even take her shirt off for 4 years after having this. She went septic on her breast. It looked like she was mauled by a wolf on her left side. And now look at that smile, you know, happy to show herself, happy to feel free. And then she and her husband are having a great time once again. So this is my favorite guy. I'm going to speak to him tomorrow because we're developing a TV show, a docu-series on this sort of subject. This is Dr. Carson Bruns, a young PhD at the University of Colorado, mechanical engineering. And he's quite an accomplished artist himself. This is his tattoo work on his body. We see again the geometric design, sacred geometry, a tree of life with the DNA chain coming through here. So he's really into art and science and tattoos. And what he has done is he uses nanotechnology and tattooing to better our lives, create superhuman powers via tattoos. So here he is hard at work. He's doing what we call, he's using microcapsules to put in special dyes. And these microcapsules protect the dyes so they don't get deteriorated by the skin. So here he is going to town, and this one is for skin cancer patients. With thousands of cases of preventable skin cancer every year go diagnosed. This pigment, when exposed to UV rays, shows us that we've had too much sun exposure and that we're at risk, and that we need to either apply more sunblock or get into the shade immediately. We're also seeing this used in its temperature, where the microcapsules can determine homeostasis through temperature. So if you tell your bodies that if you line up the pigments with like 35 degrees Celsius, 36, 37, you can see when you're coming onto a fevers. It can be very useful in many illnesses. Also with diabetics, we're seeing this pigment being able to maybe use for blood sugar levels. So if your blood sugar becomes dangerous, the tattoo suddenly appears, maybe as freckles or some design. Also for blood alcohol levels, we could conceivably get a tattoo, say when we're going out and we don't want to feel hungover, we could have this tattoo that indicates your blood alcohol levels very high. And most excitingly, Dr. Bruns is creating, you can recharge, he's charging up these microcapsules to recharge pacemakers. So you could recharge, usually we'd have to do heart surgery to recharge a pacemaker. We can do this with tattoos. So this is all evolving technology that we're getting very, very excited about. So I want to point out how well your own country has evolved in tattooing on the global trend. With Instagram, tattooing is rampant. Most tattoos all over the world are starting to look the same. India, however, you guys, your artists have this really unique style, and it's very, very difficult to pull off in this Instagram world. And again, here we see some incredible talents coming out of India, lots of gods and goddesses, of course, lots of spirituality and philosophy, these wonderful themes. So to wrap this up, I want to point out, this is my friend, I ironically met Aisha Katgata, whose father is a member of your club, a week ago today. And it was huge karma because I, again, never had met many Indians aside from our wonderful crew from Steering Story. And there was a 12 intellectual, highly educated young Mumbaians. And she said that, you know, asked her, what would India need out of tattooing if we could think of some kind of charity action, specifically what would Rotarians maybe accomplish if we use tattooing as, you know, a form of charity. And she told me about one of their employees in the Katgata family was married to the lower caste and married into a family that required her to have a tattoo to mark her as a possession. And she had to leave. It was a terrible situation. She had to leave. And now she's very happy with the Katgatas. And, but she's very ashamed of these tattoos. She didn't want to share it with Aisha what the story was. She's very ashamed. And so Aisha and I came up with the idea that perhaps we could use, you know, match Indian tattooers' talent with covering some of these, you know, marks of shame for these women. So I'm very thrilled to do this talk with you. It was stimulating for me to research it, and I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you so much, Friday. Just a moment, please. I think I'm on mute. Yeah, there we are. Thank you so much, Friday. Am I visible, Gautam?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. Friday, as usual, you amaze me. I'm amazed on the research you did on tattooing, especially in the Indian context, plus your work in medicinal area is surreal. I'm sure every one of us enjoyed listening to you. Floor is now open to questions. Please write your questions on the chat and we'll be happy to take. Friday will be happy to answer. Just a moment. We have our first question, Friday. Gautam, our president, wants to ask, what has been your most interesting tattoo experience? Plus, would skin donation be possible after inking?
Okay, so my most interesting, I've had many interesting tattoo experiences in 30 years, as you all can imagine. But I think my most exciting experience was tying an Oscar-winning actress to a bed and tattooing her in some little campy. So I tied Angelina Jolie naked to a bed, and we did a photo shoot. And we were all, you know, she was Brigitte Bardot, and it was wild. It was really fun. It was just like girls' night, and it was a fun experience for all of us. But yeah, I was nervous, really nervous. And what was the second part of the question?
The second point was that would skin donation be possible if inked?
Skin donation, would it be possible? Skin donation? What do you mean? Are you ready to get tattooed? Is that what that is?
No, not me. It's, you know, we at Rotary have this skin donation program. So we were just curious, you know, it's a tattoo, you know, in which that's used to treat people who have gotten burns and burn victims, essentially, right? So our club is kind of really pushing for a lot of the skin donation. So I just thought, you know, if you tattoo, is there any issue with skin donation? And maybe you don't know the answer, but that just, you know, does it affect the skin to where it can be used later on? Or that's a question which you're hearing for the first time.
I've never heard that. That's an amazing question. I know that when we're doing DX flaps in breast reconstructive surgery, we'll take tissue from the doctors will take tissue from the stomach and the thighs and from the individual, and then reconstruct breasts from that skin, and that skin's fine. It tattoos beautifully. But
Gautam.
Yeah,
Hi, Gautam.
I wanted to ask you, how do you convince a person like me who wouldn't want to get his skin inked?
Praveen, I'll be honest with you, and everyone at the RC is that I wanted you all to want to get tattooed by the end of this talk. That was my job. That was my primary. So we're ready for you. We're all ready for you. Now, but I mean, okay, honestly, we have some options. So we do one thing we call a bloodline, where you can get an experience of scratch with just water, distilled water, and you can rock this kind of impression on your body for maybe 2 weeks until it. So you have that maybe starter experience. And then we also use white pigments. And that deteriorates quite quickly. And also, there's something called ephemeral ink, and it dissolves over a year. It'll disappear completely over a year.
All right. So next question, Tejas, our club secretary, he's asking, is there a particular time of the year when getting a tattoo is advisable? In short, does weather, sun affect tattooing?
That's a wonderful question. Okay, so increasingly our market is way more sophisticated than it was, say, 20 years ago. And now tattoo aficionados try to get tattooed in the winter time, you know, when you're not having so much sun exposure and sea exposure. However, our high seasons are always consistently the summer season, mostly because people see skin, they see tattoos, they want to get marked. Now, interestingly, we'll hear, oh, you can't ever go swimming, you can't go in the sea. When I work in Hawaii with heavily tattooed Polynesians with really black, intricate hours and hours of designs, the artists tell the people immediately go to the ocean and swim and clean yourself. And they believe that the salt water heals, and I have not seen any deterioration in black pigment. Black pigment is an organic pigment, it's carbon-based, where a lot of the colors are plastic beads, and we'll see those kind of fall out and deteriorate more quickly with that kind of behavior.
Mm-hmm. All right, next question, Dharmendra is asking, and this one is very interesting, Friday. Dharmendra is asking, does a tattooed person get disqualified from defense? Your comments, Friday.
Disqualified from what?
From defense, from armed forces, from military?
No, we don't. You know, interestingly, increasingly, our labor pool is getting tattooed. So when I was 30 years ago, when I was a young artist, we were working with 5 Navy bases in Florida, you know, so we tattooed the military. And the bosses would come to us and say, you can't tattoo, you know, revealed image anywhere. Now the workforce is so tattooed that they will lose out. You know, there was actually an article in the London Times that said the millennials are so tattooed that if you exclude tattooed individuals from your job applicants, that you will lose the top talent.
No, I'm talking about defense. I'm talking about armed forces, not just the workforce.
Yeah, they can't afford to exclude tattooed people anymore. The population, the millennial population is so tattooed. So we're talking 30% of the United States now. Mm-hmm. You know, and millennial daughters, millennial girls are more tattooed than millennial boys as of March 2012. And they are also out earning millennial boys 5 cents on the dollar. So those two statistics have never happened before in history. So we're seeing an increase in tattooing and a feelings of independence. And maybe with this gig economy, you know, people are making their own monies. We can't rely on companies anymore, you know, to work for 30 years. You know, our sense of autonomy and expression is following.
All right. So now, Kamal, the next question to you, Friday. Kamal is asking whether any diabetic person can get a tattoo, or what are the medical contraindications for getting a tattoo? Means medically, who is unfit to get a tattoo?
Okay, so we don't like to tattoo pregnant people, you know, pregnant women. Tattooing is very stressful. Otherwise, it's a minor procedure. We go 3 millimeters in the surface of the skin. That's as deep as a skin knee. It's very shallow. The pigment is heavy. It stays below the dermis. It doesn't get shed by the cells. So mostly we would tell the folk, talk to your doctor. Diabetics don't seem to have a problem. The ones that we do kind of worry about, again, are pregnant women and people with blood thinners. If you have blood thinners, you know, you may want to worry about that a little bit. But you want to be healthy when you get your tattoo. Yeah, Army Policy 2021. What am I saying? Policy of Indian Army. Mm-hmm. We got to check on that one. Tattoo is not allowed. Okay, well, your culture, going back to the Indian Army discussion, it's coming. Babies, you know, we would say the same thing up even 15 years ago, and now the population's so tattooed, necks, hands, and those are the ones the armies want, the young guys, you know, and the young guys, these millennial kids, necks and hands first thing, you know, and we used to tell people it was illegal so we wouldn't get the backlash, but now we would be, you just have to use your own judgment for it. But young people are tattooing young people, so we can't stop them.
Okay, Nilesh is asking, why do so many sports celebrities tattoo themselves? Any specific reason for that?
I would say that I can only speculate, but I would argue that goes back to that warrior mentality where we're seeing those manhood ceremonies. So, and again, the more people are tattooed, the more immunity they have, the less cortisol they have, and the more they're able to deal with stress. So this is statistics, this is new science coming out. So in addition to the mentality, I'll tell you what, if I get ready to talk to you all, I was getting dressed today, I'm like looking at my sleeves, I'm like, okay, girl, we're going in and we're going to fight a good fight for our friends, just have a good time, but also try to be as impressive as possible and bring my best game. And I feel that that's why we see so many more athletes getting tattooed.
Correct. Friday, you mentioned about the long history of tattooing associated in India, but how do you explain that it is still in a conventional country like India, or let's say, I wouldn't say orthodox, but it's still conventional country. Why is it still a taboo?
Why is it still a taboo? A taboo in India?
Yeah.
I am looking at this headline right now. This is a Scroll In magazine.
Mm-hmm. This
is from 2018. Indian millennials are embracing religious and spiritual tattoos as indigenous cultures reject them. Mm-hmm. So the United States is a very young culture. We're like 250 years old, of course. And we left our ancestors in a sense. So we don't have maybe the burden of that, answering to grandma and great-grandma, great-grandfather. And we also have a dissolution of family and church in the 70s with the increase in divorce. We're not looking at companies again to support us, hire and fire very easily in the United States. We think that this is probably a trend that's going global as we see an increase in tattoos, especially for millennials. India has a wide ranging tradition of tattoos, especially from lower castes and tribes. So that would be a way, that would be one reason why people are reluctant to get tattooed. We saw the same in England, honestly. I went to the UK in 2000, and I was expecting to do all sorts of cool Celtic tattoos, and they were not getting tattooed. They have a really classist system, and the lower classes, were the ones getting tattooed. And it wasn't until the tattoo TV shows happened, 2005, that suddenly England thought tattoos were sexy, and they all got tattooed. And that's ironic because Prince Charlie I went to the Hawaiian Islands and got tattooed. So suddenly in high society in London, these people were getting tattooed secretly. And even Winston Churchill's mother had a snake tattooed around her wrist. So we're seeing these, fluctuations. But India, with 4,000 years of this, you guys are a big mountain.
All right, Friday. This is the last question for today evening. We're running out of time now. We have 10 more minutes for the meeting today. Can someone with tattoo donate blood? This question is by Rahul.
That is a wonderful question. And no, right now, we have some prejudice still with donating blood. You have to wait a year in the United States. I'm not sure what it says in what's going on in India, but they want us to wait a year. This is all from the AIDS backlash from the 80s. So if you're tattooed, you have to wait a year.
Right, correct.
Correct. Thank you so much, Tattoo. Sorry, thank you so much, Friday. So Tattoo.
Bipul is showing something.
Yeah. I'm seeing the tattoo. What's written over there?